Greetings everyone. Season 3 has had a little more time to settle. Not to the point of where tier lists are on every corner, but rather to the point where people have had more time to absorb the changes, see what happened to their main, to the top tiers, and maybe the character they dislike or compare theirs to the most. And in this period, as usual, we got and are still getting, because the roster is so massive, videos by fantastic, fun, and entertaining YouTubers, of course, all of which great players, that attempt to summarize or cover briefly the changes each character got. And because nobody can be a specialist with every character, or be so in-depth with them, they can totally get things wrong sometimes, and it's okay, because Tekken is an ocean of complexity and it's impossible to grasp everything, sometimes even as a specialist or a pro player. That's why they keep repeating the same phrase, give it more time, it's so early to tell, which is true. Still, when it comes to my two mains here, the two kings, such videos and the comments people posted on them got me to the point of wanting to make this series here in order to condense all of my thoughts in one place, and give my humble take on how and in what context I understand, measure, and interpret the two kings. And I want to repeat something in order to avoid any misunderstanding. I don't think I'm the best player in the world, or even close. I get very frustrated with myself when I play, and I can clearly tell that I'm lacking a lot. But despite that, what I'm going to talk about in this series isn't going to be very subjective. It will rely on objective numbers, facts, and testing I'm going to be doing in front of you. So my skill as a player won't be much of a factor here. But with all that being said, we're all human and subjectivity is impossible to avoid completely, and even though I retested a lot of stuff and re-recorded portions of these videos many times in order to root out inaccuracies, it is not impossible for me to say something the wrong way, and if so, feel free to let me know. So what am I on about? When I saw and read these people's reactions and interpretations of the Season 3 changes for both kings, because these two characters are always closely compared, I came across a lot of statements that to me felt like misunderstandings of what each king's identity is, and how they are best played. And to clarify, I'm not going to be focusing on which king is better overall in Season 2. The consensus was that King is the stronger character than Armor King in Tekken 7, which used to not be the case in Tekken 6 and Tekken Tag 2. And I'm not here to challenge that or comment that much on that statement. What I am here for is the difference, regardless of strength. What is the design behind each king? Are they really just two sides of one coin? Is Armor King a washed-down version of King? Is Armor King a hybrid between King and Mishima's? I'll be discussing that in 3 parts. First, where they are very similar. Second, I'll focus on King, and finally Armor King, and present my conclusion and final take. Because of the way the videos ended up being structured, they could in a way double maybe as a general guide for the characters, even though that really was not my intent. So before I get to the objective stuff, let me get some subjective stuff out of the way first. So, I happen to play both kings, which is why I felt that I have the solid enough foothold or grasp on them in order to make this kind of video. When it comes to popularity contests, King's ironclad uncle here, as reflected by the usage charts that we got near the end of Season 2, seems to be like the clear winner when it comes to comparing the two. Well, maybe not clear, but overall winner. I can cite 3 reasons for this. The first of being that King here is a more specific toolset kind of character. His moves and the way they're structured and the way they kind of like condense and form a package are very specific, and if you come from playing other characters and you want to try King out, you won't find that the skill set you've accumulated over the years is going to be very helpful in order to maximize your King. And that is kind of like a double-edged sword, or kind of like it has another side to it, that leads to King players being a little bit more isolated and maybe more character loyalists than usual, perhaps. Because the same applies to them, that the skills they've accumulated, the giant swings, the whatever, will not, again, like give them a leg up when it comes to trying out or attempting to learn and play other characters. Until they see Armor King. In Armor King, they find the familiar toolset they've been looking for, and they feel that their skills that they've accumulated as playing King are finally going to help them play another character. And they don't mind Armor King, and generally they tend to at least give him a shot, maybe for a while. Whereas Armor King here, because first of all, he seems on the surface to have most of the important tools that King has in the form of his throws, of course, a lot of other iconic moves like maybe the capital punishment and so on. And because he's more crouch dash heavy, he tends to attract more visitors. Not just from King players, like I said just now, but specifically, of course, from Mishima players who have been wave dashing for ages, and they want to try, and they tend to play multiple Mishimas. So when they see Armor King, they clearly see the potential that they can utilize King within a familiar Mishima package. And which is why they tend to, at least for a while, give Armor King a try. The final reason is that you gotta say, in a way, that Armor King's design in both looks, aesthetics, story, and even move list is overall cooler. Whereas the theme you get with most of King's moves, beside the point that most of them are mainly Tekken 1, Tekken 2, and Tekken 3 animations still, is that he's a generic wrestler who's trying to wrestle you into submission. When he does his DDT, it's kind of like generic. When he does the Tijuana Twister, he clearly like pins you down in order for the referee to come and count 3 times. He's trying to tap you out and, like I said, wrestle you into submission. The versions that Armor King has of these moves are clearly much more violent and flashy. Whereas King does his Muscle Buster, like I said, Armor King kicks you in the head as you're going down. Shining Wizard, instead of knee to the face, you get boot to the skull, and he really feels like he puts his entire weight behind each and every kick and limb. When he does even this version, like the triple headbutts, it clearly looks like much more violent. It looks like he's out for revenge for his dead brother, which is of course reflected in the lore. So when you combine that with the fact that Armor King was absent for a considerable amount of time from the Tekken roster, whereas King here didn't miss a game, regardless of whether it was King 1, King 2, that doesn't change things that much for this argument. Armor King was not there for Tekken 3, he came back for Tag, and then he missed Tekken 4 and Tekken 5 Vanilla. And when he got reintroduced in Tekken 5 DR, he was almost completely reimagined and redesigned to the point of where he was almost a completely new and different character. And we even spent the vast majority of Tekken 7 without him. He was only reintroduced in the latter half of Season 2. And so again, this is like the subjective part of the video, but one may argue that Tekken 3 and Tekken 5 Vanilla are the two most iconic Tekken games in Tekken history when it comes to people choosing when it comes to accumulating a player base and people choosing mains. And combine that with what I said about King not really providing a very familiar package for other players to grant them like a foothold. Specifically Mishima players, maybe because of his like wave dash being much more difficult to execute than the typical wave dash, which is already difficult enough, and dare I say not as useful. His character loyalists stayed the same. His players kind of like stayed the exact same over all those games. And far less players either migrated away from King or into him. Whereas Armor King, I feel his players are mostly formed of what like I said, mainly visitors. They are either King players who come from playing King and thus play him in a very similar fashion, Mishima players who, like I said, love their wave dash and play him much more like a Mishima and maybe sprinkle a few throws on top. And finally, of course, you find your typical Tekken player who just wants to land a couple of wizards, see the much more violent version of the giant swing where he grabs his enemy by the armpits, flings him away, do that a couple of times, and go back to playing whatever other character they fancy. Maybe that is why, like I said, there are far less character loyalists when it comes to playing Armor King as compared to playing King, and I don't blame them. Namco just loved skipping Armor King for some reason. Maybe the recent usage chart will teach them to not do that in the future. But maybe that is why there are far less people who understand Armor King 100%. And there are far less players who have been with him for a very long time and kind of like have the ability to understand him completely and understand whatever change he gets and in what direction that takes him. Maybe that's the reason why I see a lot more opinions that I disagree with coming from Armor King players as compared to those coming from King. So enough theory and subjectivity. Why are these two characters so closely compared? Well, when you go beyond the clear Jaguar motif that they share and the way that they are clearly related in the story, their design when it comes to gameplay is actually fairly similar. Much more than surface level. You could cite that, I'm going to go over these similarities in this video, but just like a little bit of foreshadowing, for example, you could say, starting with the least important stuff, their unblockables are like way above average, I'd say, in utility. They are something that you could actually see coming out in a real match, as compared to something like Miguel's unblockables, which is much more of a troll attack. You could say that they are not really string heavy. You don't find like 5-hit strings, 4-hit strings. Most of their attacks come out in a single hit. But of course the most important thing is that they are both grapplers. And grapplers in the Tekken system, or maybe overall, revolve around the concept of substituting powerful lows where other characters have them. Of course King does have this sweep, but it's not really like a character defining thing that you're going to build strategy around. It's done from full crouch. It's much slower than typical snake edges, and like it's not really that important when it comes to this argument. But the general grappler mentality, where a Mishima mixes low sweep with mid launch, a grappler's mentality is generally around mixing throw with a mid, but preferably not a punishable launching mid, but rather a safe mid like this one. That's going to be very damaging and going to make you scared of ducking. So this is the thing that the two mainly share, and I'm going to start like examining the two in the following section. But like I said, I'm going to start, especially for this video, for the very similar stuff, where you're going to find that, on paper at least, the difference between the two characters is not very pronounced. You'd find that it's almost a zero-sum game on paper, where one move is stronger on Armor King, one move is stronger in King, and without like diving deeper, if you look only at the frame data and at the move list, you would kind of like conclude that they're both very similar. They have almost the exact same points of strength. They're just like distributed differently. But I'm going to start discovering and delving deeper into that. So, first thing I want to cover is that the size of King's move list is not a factor at all when it comes to comparing the two. The notion that Armor King is a washed down version of King is very superficial and not true. I've already gone over King's move list in a separate video, and I've kind of like demonstrated that you could argue that almost 30% of it is completely redundant legacy clutter that is just there just to inflate the move list needlessly, and if it got deleted, maybe nobody would even bat an eye. You have a lot of like generic throws with universal breaks where all it takes is for someone to tell you that that's a 2 break and you're going to be breaking it every time because there's no other throw to complement it. You'd find options where King would be shooting himself in the foot if he went for it just because it's listed on the command list and he has a clearly superior option. You find throws that, depending on how you look at it, are even worse than generic throws in Tekken 7, and especially they used to be worse in previous Tekken games. You'd find throws where the opponent has a chance to deal damage to you in return. There are a lot of things that are dumb about King's throw game and his move list in general. And so when you subtract all that stuff away, his move list becomes much more comparable in size to that of Armor King's. So the notion that Armor King's a washed down version is not something I agree with at all. Second thing is, when I call these two characters grapplers, that doesn't mean that they can't win a match if they don't land a throw. No character in Tekken is unidimensional and always has a backup plan or other points of strength. One example of this is something that I really don't like, but the kind of trend that happens in Tekken 7, that rushdown characters overall have kind of like above average keep out. Hwoarang, who's notorious for his, of course, flamingo shenanigans, once he launches you a couple of times, once he lands a couple of sweeps on you, the Hwoarang players I found, they back away and they start chugging this. This guy I faced did this like 5 times in a row blindly, to the point where it looked like he rubber banded his controller and went away to have a drink. Regardless of how I feel about that, this is kind of like one of the aspects that you have to keep in mind when comparing characters, that when I say these two characters are grapplers, that doesn't mean that they have to rely only on their throws to win. They always have other aspects that are strong about them. Maybe they're not the best at that, but they're still maybe above average. So how does this translate into the two kings? Well, generally what we look for when we're comparing characters is, for example, normal hit launchers, how quick they are, how punishable, from what range can they be accessed, how reliable, so on and so forth. Plus frames, how reliably, from what range can you acquire them, how quickly, how much of a factor they actually play in your game. Punishment, standing, crouching with punishment, how painfully, how reliably can you punish stuff, especially from range. Homing, tracking abilities, can you step the character all day, does it control that, how well. And finally, even though I might have skimmed over a few things, you get to their mix-up potential and how they can break turtles and, well, enact their game. So starting with the next video, because this one has already dragged on long enough due to my blabbering and ranting, I will start examining the two kings a little bit more up close. And I will start, like I said, with their similarities, stuff where I hold the two kings to be very, very, very comparable and pretty much neck to neck. And then I will dive deeper in to see where they actually differ and how their mentality and strategy kind of like crystallizes into like a solid package. So until then, take care and goodbye.